Dear viewers, welcome on my channel. This will be a new series about weapon testing through ages. In my hands you can see authentic Neolithic arrows. Today we will test them. We will see how such arrow penetrates flesh, skin and bones. But all this cannot take place without Paul. Paul is a medieval weapon specialist.
Hello, my name is Paweł Staszczak. You can know me from YouTube channel Paweł Historyk. I made for today tests couple pieces of Neolithic weapon. We have a variety of weapons, so I think you today see something very interesting.
And this is only the beginning of this great series. In this series we will test weapons from Neolithic period, Bronze Age, Iron Age, early medieval, full medieval, and we will not end there. And at the end we will cover gunpowder weapons. Our aim is to make this ballistic test as much authentic as it can be. So as you can see, all these elements we used in our test are made by Paul, handmade, with very big attention to details. Look at this arrowhead. Soon we will test how this flint arrowhead is effective against flesh and bones. What else is important about authenticity of our experiment?
It's that on what we make our tests. We create a mannequin designed to realistically replicate human tissues, because we are referring to a weapon that was used in war, not for hunting. In this pocket, made of leather, we have a piece of fat about the thickness of a finger, which is meant to imitate human adipose tissue. But most importantly, we have a piece, actually a large piece of ribs. So we will check how our weapons penetrated and what kind of holes it creates, as well as what happens to the tissue upon impact. We have muscles, we have fascia, and most importantly, we have bones. Those bones will be the greatest challenge. We will see if any of those Neolithic objects will be able to pierce through it completely.
Because, for example, we have such a beautiful axe made of horn, and we are very curious if we will be able to smash bones with it. We have variety of javelins, we have spears, and also we have a club. I have to go for a club.
A club that is a blunt weapon. It is made from a specially selected piece of wood where the head is created from a section where additional branches grow, making it harder and more durable.
We're starting with the smallest weapon, bow and arrows.
And these are no ordinary arrows. We have prepared several types of arrowheads here. All the arrows are made from hazel sticks. What you see here. These scratch marks are necessary to straighten the stick. When it's still growing, quite twisted, you just need to hit it at the spot where it's most bent or crooked. Once it's heated, you can shape it, and when it cools down, it will hold the shape you've given it. But the most important part is the arrowhead. Of course, in the Stone Age, they didn't have access to good material for arrow tips. That's why they had to make do with what they had. Here, for example, we have an arrowhead made from the tip of antler. The antlers of animals have a convenient shape, with the tips formatting a elongated, pointed cone. You all need to do is file it down a bit, hollow out the inside, and you can easily attach the arrowhead on your shaft. This arrowhead resembles a bodkin tip. We hope that due to its aerodynamic shape, it will hit accurately and penetrate our mannequin. But of course, we don't really solely of those types of arrowheads. The most common archaeological findings relate to bows are arrowheads made of flint. Probably not because they were the most common, but because they are the ones that have been preserved. It's simply a piece of rock, in this case, chocolate flint, that has been properly worked. It's very brittle, almost like glass, so they strike chips of flakes from it. On one hand, you could say it's an excellent material because this stone is much harder even than steel. But on other hand, because it's brittle, after hitting on our target, especially if it strike a bone, it may shatter, and thus it may not be as effective. And most importantly, it won't be recoverable. In fact, when archaeologists find such small arrowheads, they often discover them damaged.
Yes, they are quite wide. In my opinion, they will not penetrate too well because of this wide shape.
Exactly, that's why such tests are necessary. We're not just theoretics speculating about that might happen. We will actually test it and find out. The third type of arrowheads are bone tips. Those are cattle bones that have been properly worked. This is a typical leaf-shaped arrowhead. This type of arrowhead is primarily used for hunting. In hunting, the goal isn't necessarily for the arrowhead to penetrate the prey as deeply as possible, but rather to cut through as much tissue as possible and to cause the prey to bleed out as quickly as possible. Unless, of course, we're hunting smaller prey and want the arrow to interfere with its escape. For that, arrows with barbs are used. Look here, if its arrow is spinning and it has feathers to induce a stabilizing spin, when it enters the prey, while rotating, it will lodge in such a way that it won't be easy to remove it. But we'll see on a nearly real-life example. Whatever, it will even catch to the barbs.
That's very interesting. You know, from my point of view, these arrowheads are the most fearsome. If I can choose, I don't want to be hit by this type the most.
Yes, that's for sure.
It can cause great damage and very big pain.
I'm worried they might be a bit too brittle, since it's a bone after all. I'm wondering if they'll hold up to the shot. For small animals, definitely. A rabbit, a hare, on something small, maybe even birds, would be fine. But for something bigger, or a human, we will see.
Yes, they are quite fragile, but I think they will make very nasty damage.
But what we'll be shooting with? We've decided not to use a traditional historical bow today because it's hard to find a truly good historical bow, like the ones used in the historical Stone Age. However, by using a modern bow, we were able to calibrate it in such a way that it provides the power and arrow flight characteristics similar to those described the researchers in the context of Stone Age or Neolithic bows.
Let's start.
We'll start with the flint arrowhead, which has the greatest potential to penetrate our mannequin the deepest. So, what's the verdict? It looks like only the skin was pierced here. So we need to make adjustments. Not true? No, wait. I can feel that something did happen here. Look closely. The arrowhead is fine, but the skin isn't torn. You can see very clearly here that It's actually cut. The arrowhead acted like a knife, piercing with its scarred edges, almost like a kitchen knife. But let's see what actually got it. The fat remains untouched. Let's check the muscles. Oh yeah, I thought this was a complete miss, but there's clear signs that the adipose tissue was I did hit. It actually went through. Although it missed because it passed through so easily, but it turned out we were wrong, and it's powerful. We didn't hit the bone, but we hit the fat, masculine skin. So, if a Stone Age warrior were struck not in the ribs, but somewhere in abdomen, that would be a fatal hit. Looks like our mannequin is doing this job. Alright. Here, the hit is actually central. It definitely passed through the fat. It went through the skin and there mark here. Let's check if it's passed through the bone. There's a mark on the skin and it's cut like a scalpel. Let's check. No, the bone is intact. It's like along the bone and passed through the tissues. So it seems that when hitting the ribs, the arrow doesn't penetrate the hard bone but slides along the ribs and enters the space between them. So it would hit the lungs or heart. Is the arrowhead damaged? Yes. Look, the arrowhead, it's slightly damaged. There are signs of chipping. And such arrowheads with those marks are often found by archaeologists in human remains. This fragment still moves and can be detached. So, we know that the flint arrowhead is definitely lethal. Let's try another. Arrowheads made from antler tips. On one hand, it's the most aerodynamic, so one may think it would penetrate easily. But the other hand, it's not as hard or sharp as the flint one, but let's see. This antler arrowhead didn't cut through like the flint one, but it definitely went in very deeply. Look at this. There's no damage, but the hole is quite severe. Unlike with flint, where the arrowhead cuts through the tissues and they could potentially close up, this arrowhead pushes the tissues outside and they stay that way. Let's check the fat. Of course, it went all the way through, but what about the muscles? There's the hit. Let's try it out. Quite deep. Yes, it's stabbed at the bone. It didn't penetrate the bone, but it went that deep into the body. So it's definitely lethal. Well, lethal, but not when hitting bone. If it hits soft tissue, then yes, it would be dangerous for sure. But what surprised me the most is that even though it hit a bone, I can actually feel it because it's reached the rib, it didn't get destroyed. Up to this point, you can see the mark of bluish charcoal, but from here, it's still intact. This is very taut. Well, this is interesting. Now let's see how the bone arrowhead. And now the bone arrowheads with barbs. I'm most curious about whether it will withstand the impact against the hard bone. It's quite thin, but is it brittle? We'll see. Oh, something interesting happened here. I thought I missed badly, but look, it hits a hard part, you see, and it's slight along the fat, but still look at the terrible wound it creates. Yes, it's slight off. You know what? Let's repeat the shot. And once more, the same bone arrowhead. I try to hit right in the center this time, so it doesn't slide off. Now it's worked. Come over and have a look. The wound is one side is similar to the flint one, but you can see that the bone arrowhead is blunter, which is the are torn elements. However, it didn't go in deep. It's hard to remove, but that's probably the point. It went in this far. Look, it hit the bone and the tip broke off. This much penetration, so definitely no bone penetration. Oh wait, there's a mark. Let's see. Wow, but do you see the light? There's a penetration, maybe small. It's a rib right here, right in the center of the rib. So, of course, it won't harm the lungs, but I feel a fragment. Look, this is the broken piece. The arrow has great force, even though the bow is at set low values. Surprising. Maybe one more shot. It won't come out now because the tip broke off, but you can still feel it. So, we know again that's when hitting the ribs. They can protect, but only the ribs can protect. If the bone arrowhead pierces the rib, soft tissues don't stand a chance. It's hard to hit the target with those arrows because, unlike modern ones, they different greatly from another. They have different lengths, which can be trimmed, but they wide curvature and balance vary as well, making it challenging to shot accurately. Now it's okay. There's definitely a true penetration. It's turned out nicely. The fat is definitely pierced. I can't pull it out because its shape is somewhat... The entry wound is relatively smooth. It won't come out because one side of it has a kind of notch, so it's hard for me to remove. I got stuck here. I think this is also intentional to make the arrow difficult to pull out. Arrows with antler tips come out very easily, but this one doesn't. Let's see what happened here. I'm very curious. It went through the fat very easily. All through the wound is a big red jet. I'm not sure if that's because of the arrow itself, because of how I tried to remove it, but it's here, and it was definitely caused by this arrow. But what happened here? Oh, interesting. Look at this. Something is cracking here. The hit was here. I cut through the muscles, and there a piece of bone that moves a bit, which means it's definitely a fatal wound.
Okay, Paul, tell me, what do you think about this part of the experiment?
At first, I thought weapons like this were much less deadly. I was convinced that flint arrowheads could penetrate quite deeply because we have archaeological advance of this. Many types of arrowheads have been found embedded in the bones of humans and animals, but I didn't realize how lethal is the other tips here. For example, the one made of antler, it went it deeply, but in addition to that, look at how deep and wide its wound it caused was. The blood vessels aren't just cut, they're torn. They have so much space to bleed that a wound like this would bleed profusely. The question is whether such an arrowhead could be easily removed from the body. Don't think so, and we have proof here. When you try pull it out by hand, it comes out easily, but you can feel that it's tightly wedged. I don't know if you able to hear this, but probably yes. It's come out with a characteristic sound, which means it created such an effect in the wood, acting like a cork. So after being removed, the blood would definitely gush out. The most surprising ones for me were the bone tips, especially the barbed one. Although the barbs seemed to have broken off somewhere, it surprised me that it went all the way in. It pierced through the rib, even through its beef bone, which isn't much harder than the one in the mannequin. It's managed to go through. And look at how wide the opening it's left is. Blood won't flow very heavily from here. To summarize, I think all of them are equally deadly. At first, I would have said this one because it would make it harder to seek help, but on the other hand, it causes to the most tearing. The flint tips are almost surgical, very precise, as you can see from the cuts. Here's a cut, maybe the bone tip. It's very jagged, but the one made by the flint tip is a smooth. This weapon is definitely deadly, even though we were shooting with a reliably weak bow. Definitely.
These flint ones look so smooth. You may even think it's nice to be hit by them.
I think it's all depends on where the hit lands. We still have another weapon to test, perhaps not as deadly, but one that looks much less friendly, and we'll get to that in just a moment.
Now we will test bigger weapons. We have 3 javelins here and a spear.
For the most people, these are essentially synonyms. Javelin, spear, lance, pike. Every pull weapon is referred to by a multitude of names, but they each have their own classification. This, for instance, is a javelin, and it really can't be called anything else. It's a javelin because it's designed for throwing. This weapon, as you can see, is much thinner and more delicate than a spear, so it's not suitable for melee combat where you'd try to parry blows. It's only meant for throwing, whether by hand or with the aid of a special launcher, which you see in a moment, but its purpose is solely throwing. On the other hand, the spear was designed for melee combat. A spear is significantly thicker, making it less likely to break during combat. For example, when parrying blows, however, a spear and a lance are two entirely different weapons. Unlike a lance, a spear has a tip, some kind of reinforcement at the end that increases the damage dealt and, second, make the weapon more durable. A lance, on the other hand, simply has a sharpened wooden tip, usually hardened by charring. This is done for two reasons. To make it slightly tougher, since carbon is harder than wood, and second, because in time when metal knives weren't available, sharpening was done in a simpler way, using stone tools like flint. The process involved placing the stick into a fire until the tip started to burn, then rubbing it again a stone until it formed a pointed shape.
And also here, as with arrowheads, we have different types of heads. Flint one, antler one, and this one hardened by the fire. I would like to point one very important thing here, because these weapons was made mainly to hunt animals. Because in Neolithic period it was mainly human versus nature. But human wouldn't be human if he don't want to fight each other. Because the land was full of animals and you can claim it wherever you want.
Yes, but I wasn't really about that animal, because we don't have much evidence to organize group violence during the Paleolithic period. The Old Stone Age, when humans primarily engaged in foraging and hunting, abundance of animals and food sources. It was possible to simply move 2 kilometers further along a stream if needed. Water and food were always accessible. But when humans transitioned to a sedentary lifestyle, farming and the land and staying in one place, they began to accumulate resources, including surpluses. This shift allowed them to engage in activities like creating decoration on developing settlements. Preparing a field back then wasn't as simple as it is today, when land can simply be by bought. Involved clearing the forest, cutting down trees and burning the vegetation. The field itself was an enormous asset. In the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age, there is evidence of collective violence. This includes mass graves containing people who show signs of injuries. For instance, one burial site in a French cave includes women and children who were either killed in ways that leave no marks, such as strangulation, of true soft tissue injuries that don't preserve in the archaeological records. Most of the young men, however, bear visible wounds on their arms, spines or skulls, indicating combat. This directly points to conflict. Already in the Neolithic, people were engaging in organized conflicts, even wars, prolonged disputes with large-scale violence. There are mass graves and cemeteries containing only men, many of from show evidence of health wounds, not injuries caused by animals.
This is not surprising for me because as human is human, there was always violence in our history, and I think maybe even earlier they fight between themselves, but we have no evidence about it. Okay, let's try these weapons.
I have some javelins here, and those one are fletched. Of course, not all of them would have had such feathers, but we'll be throwing them over a long distance to see how this kind of launcher actually works. I'll try throwing a javelin by hand first to see where it's land, and then I'll use this device to repeat the attempt. Throwing device like this were known even before the invention of the bow. The oldest one found discovered in France in 27,000 years old. This makes it one of the earliest tools that helped humans throw objects over long distance. In some indigenous tribes, like those in South Africa or Oceania, such devices are still used today. Generally, it's observed that when a culture develops the bow, those throwing devices fall out of use. The device is very simple, operating solely on the principle to leverage, but you'll see that for yourself shortly. Not bad for me. Now let's repeat this with the throwing device. I hook the notch on the javelin into the hook of the thrower. Hold the end of the device and throw it over a distance. It doesn't fly as far as an arrow shot from the bow, but a javelin like this is much heavier than an arrow, so the energy transformed could be quite similar. Most importantly, you don't need a complex bow to use it. Making a bow isn't simple. You need to shape it so both limbs bend evenly, find the right kind of wood, season it properly, and prepare to good bowstring. Making a thrower, on the other hand, isn't nearly as difficult. Let's see how those javelin tips perform against the mannequin. We'll test whether those heavy javelins, though slower than arrows, can still penetrate the mannequin. We have a tip made from antler. No, it's embedded deeply, and the hole is quite massive. Look at this, blood would be pouring out here. And the muscles? This strike, no, it didn't go very deep. It's wide, but not deep. But with a much lower speed, as we said before, cultures that invented the bow tend to abandon javelin throwers. Let's try a different tip. I'm curious to see how it performs. This time a white tip made of bone. Aerial bow test showed that the tips are incredibly little. That's solid hit. I heard the skin tearing. Yes, this is a massive wound. The tip has dulled slightly. There's a bit of blunting. Let's take a closer look. Wow, this one is particularly striking. The wound is extremely wide. Let's check what happens here. It passed cleanly between the ribs. That's a fatal hit for sure. It's definitely more lethal than the antler tip. True, I expected the injuries to be a bit more dramatic. We're dealing with low speed here, but the weight is significant. Let's see what's next. Alright, we have a hit with javelin, a lance without a tip. It's penetrated quite deeply and the injuries are substantial. Look at the fat here, it's torn. The muscles are also torn rather than cut. It wouldn't be able to pierce bone, but it still wouldn't want to be hit by something like this. Javelins are certainly effective. Just look at the entry wood is the skin, it's horrifying. It might not be immediately fatal on the first strike, but the sheer mass of the weapon does its job. By far, the most dangerous one is the javelin with a bone tip. Now, let's move on to an even heavier caliber.
I love spears. I love fighting with these weapons, and Paul gave me the honor to try these Neolithic spears on our piece of pig. It was a great pleasure.
So what happened? Was more than just fat pierced here? It stopped just before the bone. Yes, it gave a nice crunch, but it stopped before the bone. You can feel it 3 or 4 millimeters. Let's take a look at that flint arrowhead.
Now this beautiful flint spearhead. I'm a little worried that I will damage it. It looks fragile, but all we do is for science. It was a great pleasure.
But listen, you could hear it cutting through those layers of skin. Yes, we'll just see if it's even. Try to aim here, because there are bones here. Given the state of medicine at the time, no matter where you hit, it's death.
Here you can see how big the hole is. Given the state of medicine in Neolithic period, I think this wound is lethal.
I risk my life. Did it go through? It went through. It's hit the strike. It went over half a centimeter. Yes.
What's quite surprising for me, the flint spearhead is not damaged at all.
Fat, skin, even through this, also flint, and seems sharper. The hit isn't clean, but now the most important question: where did it hit? Did it close up immediately? It's massive. That's it. It's damaged the bone and excited through this opening. So, the mass, force and personal dignity of Ziemowit made it undeniable that today the spear has become the most deadly weapon.
I have to add here that using this spear was a great pleasure for me. Perhaps my ancestors were Neolithic spearmen. This is a great joy for me to use this flint weapon.
In the 18th and 19th century, the lance was referred to as the Regina Armorum. Arrows and spears made from antlers turn out to be very effective. That's why the antler hammers will also be used. On the side we have a hard solid head which is really taut, and on the other side we have a beak. Look, it's cut at an angle because the antler inside has a kind of foam, and on the outside the white edge is hard, so it needs to be cut at an angle to reach that hard part. Such finds are among the most common at Neolithic sites. Here, I actually hit with the back of the hammer, which tilt the target, but did anything happen? Okay, let's try hitting with the beak. Then we'll see the results. Okay, now we hit with clean, so let's see how deadly it is. The tape definitely didn't survive. Okay, yes, the skin here is completely torn. Wow, the hit didn't break the bones, so it was probably aimed at the head to stun. But look here, after the break hit, the wounds it's horrendous and crashes. So yes, it's a very deadly weapon from horseback. Yes, but let's see what happened with this axe. Nothing at all. Hear the impact, and it didn't even dull a terrible weapon. Simple but terrible. Now, what about the summary? What did we learn? Yes, but look here. We have various hits. The spear did the job, but what surprised me is this hit. This is a clean hit with a flint tip. It's not torn like with a bone tip, because here the cut looks like it was made with a knife. We only broke one tip, but that's because it hit wood. Otherwise, they withstood, so it's resoluble weapons and incredibly deadly weapon, despite being made from simple materials. In fact, if these spear tips were used for today's hunting, they would be still effective. The only issue here was that the bow was set to a low force.
I was quite surprised by the deep level of penetration made with these Neolithic weapons.
And still, there were several true hits, even on a mannequin that it's really thick. I'm very curious to see what will happen when we test Bronze Age weapons.